Thank you, David, for inviting me along to speak. So this has some overlap, I think, with a few things that Amy has talked about today, and perhaps a few things that Rachel might cover later on as well. So I am coming at this as a law lecturer who teaches tax, and I want to think about how to produce tax-aware law graduates. What should we teach them? When should we teach them? And what is the most appropriate way to try and create these tax-aware law graduates? So the reasons for me thinking about all this now, obviously every so often you want to reflect on the teaching that you're doing and think about, well, why am I doing all of this? It's actually 15 years now that I have been teaching tax in some capacity. I started very young. I started when I was still a postgraduate student, and I taught part-time while I was a practicing solicitor. And then in 2013, I moved to the University of Dundee and became a full-time law lecturer. And I spend a lot of my time teaching tax. So I teach tax undergraduate on the LLB programme, which is actually our most popular elective subject at Dundee, which surprises quite a few people when you mention that. And I teach Diploma in Legal Practice, which I'll explain what that is later. It's basically the Scottish version of the LPC. I teach private client because my background is that I was a tax and trust solicitor for about 8 years. I also teach Masters Tax, which is international tax, and I teach a few other subjects, succession, trusts at the undergraduate level. So I was reflecting on what I was doing and how I was doing it, and also it was timely because in the last year or so, the Law Society of Scotland has been thinking about the core curriculum for the whole LLB. So which subjects do law students in Scotland have to study? What are the core subjects that they need to do in order to have an accredited law degree at the end of the day? They're also thinking about their postgraduate vocational courses as well, and the syllabus for those, and whether they need beefed up in certain ways. I've also had an eye on changes to the qualification route for solicitors in England and Wales. We actually at Dundee offer an English law degree, so it is of interest to us. And also our Scots students have the opportunity of becoming dual qualified. Well, at the moment they do. We might have to rethink the title of that degree in due course. But it's actually very popular for Scots students to qualify in England as well. So I'm keeping an eye on what's happening down here with the solicitor's qualifying exam. Also, I have been this year finishing off my postgraduate certificate in academic practice in higher education. I think that's what it's called. So the fellowship part, I had to come up with a project. So I thought, well, what am I thinking about anyway? What am I interested in? And I'm interested in tax and how I can, so what I chose was employability of law graduates and how tax can fit into that. I'm particularly thinking about employability because a lot of our law graduates do go on to vocational stage and how best to prepare them for that, but also because around half of law graduates, as we know, go on to non-graduate careers. Quite a few of them go into accountancy, banking, civil service, and so on. So the Law Society, as I say, they accredit law degrees in Scotland. You're probably aware that Scots law is quite distinct from English law. We have our own legal system, we have our own courts. I don't know if anyone's noticed the Court of Session in Scotland, the highest court, has made an interesting decision this morning about the prorogation being unlawful, as an aside. And also, as you heard yesterday, Scottish taxes are developing in their own right. The Scottish Parliament has new powers and it's been starting to make quite significant changes to tax and creating new taxes. The Law Society's remit is that there are over 11,000 Scots qualified solicitors, and that counts people who are practicing all over the world. I'm not entirely sure if that number includes me as a non-practicing solicitor these days. But we have 10 law schools in Scotland who offer the accredited LLB, and 6 who offer the next vocational stage, the Diploma in Professional Legal Practice. So at Dundee we offer the LLB. As I say, we also offer the English LLB and this vocational stage, the Diploma. Now last year the Law Society of Scotland started a consultation on their curriculum. They do this in a cyclical basis. The last time they did it was 2011. So every sort of 7 years or so, they look again at what is in our curriculum. Is it appropriate? Do we need to make any changes? Now, the areas that are under the spotlight in this review were, unsurprisingly, EU law, information technology. They felt that law graduates were not coming up with the skills that they need to go out into practice in terms of digital technology, and tax. So should tax be a mandatory core subject for Scots Law students? And just last week, they have published an updated set of programme outcomes for both the LLB and the Diploma in Legal Practice. Now, I'll come on at the very end to tell you what they decided. I won't spoil it for now, whether they decided to make tax a compulsory subject or not, but that's what I've been thinking about in the last year or so. I'm quite heavily involved in the Law Society of Scotland, obviously as a lecturer, but also I'm on their tax law committee, which advises solicitors on changes to tax. We do a lot of work with the Scottish Parliament, with Revenue Scotland, in trying to get their systems improved and working for Scots solicitors. So quite often I go to meetings and they're full of quite often my old bosses and people I've worked with, solicitors in big firms, and I'm hearing what they're saying about the graduates that are coming to them and how well prepared they are for going into the firms. And basically, part of this review came around, the reason tax came up was a lot of solicitors were saying, well, our graduates, they don't know enough tax. We can't leave them to it. We expect more sort of readiness from day one when they start as a trainee with us. So tax used to be a compulsory part of the LLB. So until 2011, all students in Scotland doing an accredited degree had to take tax. They could not avoid the tax course. Now, I think that had some benefits. I can't myself say I would have definitely chosen to do tax if I hadn't been forced to. I might well be doing something completely different had I not had to go and do that course in 2002, I think it was. And I was very lucky. I studied at Edinburgh under Sandra Eden, who's a very good tax academic. And it was taught very well, and obviously I loved it enough to go on and practice in tax and then become an academic. But it wasn't universally loved. As we know, it's a bit of a Marmite subject. And I think the fact that it was core and mandatory, a lot of students just went into the room thinking, I'm not going to like this, and they resisted it because it was enforced that they had to pass it. I did have a bit of a sideline tutoring people who struggled to pass it, who needed to pass it back in the day. So it did have some personal benefits for me, but I can see that it did create some difficulties. For example, I do have a friend who is in the Procurator Fiscal Service, that's the Scots equivalent of the Crown Prosecution Service, and they had about 7 attempts to pass this tax exam, and they're never going to do tax unless they get involved in some tax VAT fraud case or something. But you know, they had real struggles to tick this box to get onto the next stage. Another point that was put forward, perhaps a reason why they dropped the mandatory nature of tax, was that some of the law schools were saying that it's hard to staff. They said it was hard to get people to come in and teach tax to our law students. Perhaps there are other careers, if you're trained in tax, that you can go and do that are more lucrative than academia. They also had, sometimes they would get an accountant in to teach, sometimes either a university academic accountant or from outside. Another point was that the curriculum was very, very crowded. So we have lots of mandatory courses in Scotland. I think in England there's 7 core courses you have to do as part of the law degree. We actually have more. We have to do extra succession and extra bits of family law and some other parts of social security law as well that are core. So our curriculum is already quite crowded. So if something had to give, well, tax gave in 2011 and they dropped it as mandatory. So, since then, in Scotland, only 2 of the 10 universities have been teaching tax on their LLB, and that was Edinburgh with Sandra Eden, where I taught and tutored. And then when I started at Dundee, I developed a programme there as well. And as I say, it's been very popular, even though it's not been compulsory, and perhaps part of it is because it's not compulsory that it might be popular. I think we can speculate as to reasons why students are quite keen on doing tax, though. I think it's a good commercial subject. They might be thinking of the money. Maybe it's to do with the other options that they have when they study tax. So I teach it as an honours class. And this year I've got 83 students, I think, starting the class next week on Monday. And I have to split that into 3 large seminar groups. So as I say, it's quite popular. I also do some lectures to kick it off as well. But it works quite well. I think it's popular, it gets good feedback. And students who do the undergraduate tax course, they say, I've heard from them, that when they've gone on to the next stage, the diploma, that they have a better understanding. They can hit the ground running more with the tax content when they get onto the vocational stage. So the argument could be then that the students who don't do it are missing out on that. And certainly from my experience of teaching on diploma and speaking to other diploma providers in Scotland, there is a real difference between people who've studied tax before at undergraduate level and people who are coming in day one having done no tax. And it's quite difficult for them to catch up. So rolling on to now, as I say, we've had discussions about revival. Diploma providers are suggesting either bring it back on undergrad or perhaps have a crash course before people move on to diploma. Although that's quite difficult because how do you fund that? Where do you fit it in? How do you enforce it? A legal profession, as I say, are grumbling to me and others that the law graduates they get are not tax aware enough. The Law Society also and their insurers are suggesting that there are perhaps more negligence claims than there have been in the past. Now that could be for completely different reasons. It might not be to do with the reduction of tax in the curriculum, but it's certainly something they have their eye on. And so looking at tax again, I think, has come up at this pertinent time. Also, of course, we've got the new Scottish taxes. I've put a picture of Adam Smith's grave up here, which is in Edinburgh. And I also have to show this picture to students because one year I had a student in the exam who wrote that Adam Smith had chaired the Smith Commission on devolved taxes. Now, no, he didn't. He clearly didn't. So we've got these new Scottish taxes as well, and they've come in since 2011, so they're part of the review. So what do I mean by tax aware lawyers? So I think there's a real difference between solicitors who know about tax and are aware of the tax obligations of their clients and tax lawyers. They're quite a separate thing. So just put a quote up here from a roundtable discussion that I was involved in last year about whether tax should be resurrected as an undergraduate subject. And I like this quote that some solicitors express the view that they don't do numbers. They don't want to do numbers, keep me away from the numbers. And they almost are proud of that. And I've certainly come across that. I'm sure lots of you have come across lawyers that have a real distaste for numbers. No, don't want anything to do with that. Or they've said, no, that's for the accountants. You know, but I don't think that's convincing. I think it's not good professionalism to not know about important subjects. As I've hinted at before, there's potentially negligence. I think you have to at least know what you don't know. You have to know where there's a potential problem. You need to know when to ask for help, whether that's from someone else in a law firm, if you're in a large firm, or whether it's something you do need to refer on to an accountant. So at least a basic awareness is absolutely vital in my view, and also in all of the responses to the Law Society. The other thing is law firms are businesses, so these lawyers who are going around saying, oh, I don't do numbers, just wonder about their profitability and the rest of it. And I think it's an important element of commercial awareness, and I think that's something that is vital for law students as well when they're trying to sell themselves as knowing about the real world and commercial life. As I say, tax lawyers are quite a different creature. I've actually heard the view expressed that tax lawyers, it doesn't really matter whether we teach them or not. in the early stages, because if you go on to become a tax lawyer, no doubt you're going to do further qualifications. So I'm STEP qualified, for example, and I was moving on to do the CTA when I came into academia. You'll also have lots of lawyers who are perhaps also accountants by background, or they've done ATT. And of course, tax barristers and advocates as well are quite a separate entity. So I'm not so much worried about the tax lawyers, although as I say, I think we're missing a trick, because I don't think I would have been a tax lawyer had I not been exposed to tax. So university law courses in the UK, I tried to do a bit of a summary of, well, who actually is teaching tax in the UK. And it's not very common. There aren't very many of us tax academic lawyers around, as far as I could see. You know, it's Oxford, Cambridge, some of the bigger London universities, and then a handful of us other people in the room, and SLS and so on. So it's not every law school, even some quite large law schools don't have a tax law academic in them. I think more universities probably have masters, and I think that's because tax attracts foreign students. Certainly I teach international tax, and it's quite a good marketing tool as part of our commercial degree as well. I think also there's other masters in taxation at Oxford and so on that are available. But I don't think that it's UK students primarily who do these courses. It seems to me it's very often international students. I think I've only taught 2 UK students on my international tax module in the 6 years that I've run it. And they've both commented that it's very, very different from the undergraduate tax that I taught them before. But we can compare that, I think, to academic tax law elsewhere. It's much more developed in the United States, Australia and New Zealand. So I'm really keen to meet people from outside of our jurisdiction and talk about your tax law community and how we build ours as a kind of distinct subject of its own. Of course, we've also got the vocational stage. If we're thinking about preparing our graduates for going into practice as a solicitor or a barrister or advocate, they're obviously going to take the next stage. So tax, I did a bit of a summary of where does tax fit into the vocational stage. So in Scotland, we have the Diploma in Professional Legal Practice. So I teach on private client and business, financial and practice awareness modules of this. They're primarily taught by practicing solicitors. Occasionally accountants as well come in and teach these courses. There's not a lot of tax in there. I'm quite keen at Dundee to boost the amount of tax that we have actually in these courses. We seem to do the minimum. Even speaking to the tutors, some of them are a little bit resistant to do more tax because they think the students will be scared and don't get the calculators out, they don't like it. But I think it's really vital. I think if you're doing private client, you have to be able to do the inheritance tax calculation. That's expected of you. It's what your client expects of you. So I'm on a little mission to kind of boost that, even if the Law Society doesn't actually make any extra requirements. It's not taught as a discrete subject in the diploma, or in fact in any of the other courses that I've found. It's taught pervasively. So I have been thinking about what is the best way to teach tax. Is it best to teach it as a separate tax module, or is it better to do it pervasively? So if you're teaching conveyancing, teach about the stamp duty land tax or land buildings transaction tax then, because that's certainly how it's taught in diploma and legal practice course. Now I find, I think there's pros and cons. I think teaching it pervasively is useful when you're trying to do the practical elements and showing how a transaction happens. I think it's very natural if you are doing conveyancing to go, oh right, wait, this is what happens with tax at this point. I think it makes a lot of sense for the students to have that joined up. But as I'll come on to, I think it's maybe different in the undergraduate arena. The legal practice course, so this is for people in England and Wales who want to qualify as a solicitor. There's some tax coverage in some of the core modules, but I think there's slightly less than there is in Scotland. In Scotland, we've also got quite a lot of tax in private client, particularly inheritance tax and capital gains tax. So it's in there, but there's not an awful lot of it. And SQE, Solicitor's Qualifying Exam, for those who don't know about it, lucky you. lots of other people can tell you more about it. It's basically a new super exam. It's going to replace the legal practice course. It's going to be the new way to become qualified. Going to be multiple choice questions, quite like the New York bar exam. We just don't really know much about it yet, even though well, they keep on putting it off, I think. So we'll wait and see what happens. But I can't see that they've got much room in there to test tax in a meaningful way. And quite a lot of criticism of the multiple choice test anyway. There is a second part that's more professional skills, sort of interviewing skills and so on, that's also going to be tested. So perhaps that could be a place for that. And I looked also at the bar professional training course. Now, they don't have tax as far as I could see, and in fact they've dropped the forensic accountancy course from earlier this year. So they've gone further. They're not even having any numbers. They've gone really number phobic on it. So yes, so that's just sort of the overview of vocational courses. So I think there is an argument to say, well, it's fine if we're thinking about people being ready for the start of their training contract or their traineeship. Maybe this is the most appropriate place to have tax. But I would question, looking at all of this, whether there is enough tax in there for people who might be going into firms and dealing with tax on day one of their training contract. So moving then to my postgraduate project, so I was looking more at how to embed employability skills in tax modules. So this has a little bit of overlap with some of the things that Amy mentioned, and I was thinking about what's the most suitable style with that, and again this pervasive versus separate subject issue was coming up. And what I looked at here was the HEA Framework that was developed in 2016 about how to embed employability into the curriculum. And it's got 4 components to their report. So first of all, you define what employability means. Then you review and map where you are at the moment. Prioritise ways and places that you think that you can embed more skills into your teaching and your assessment. And then trying to measure the impact of any changes that you then make. So this was the way that I sort of worked my, my project, looking through the framework and then trying to apply it to my own teaching. And there had been a very helpful article by Knox and Stone who'd done this with some other law courses in the Law Teacher earlier this year. And what do we mean by employability? They discuss a lot about what does employability mean. And I think it means more than just the ability to get a job, first of all. That's the most basic one. I think for me it's more about how do we get them to a place where they are ready to take on the roles that you could expect them to take on as a trainee solicitor or a trainee a pupil barrister. So that's really the test. Are they career ready? And I think built into that is professionalism. So I looked at the Law Society's outcomes that they try and create on the LOB. So they're looking at competence in these areas. So subject specific, they want you to be able to look at the sources and do research, but particularly these transferable skills. So analysis, synthesis, critical judgment, evaluation, independence, and ability to learn. So I think tax ticks an awful lot of these boxes. Tax is a complex subject. You're going to be doing lots of analysis. You're going to be doing lots of statutory interpretation and so on. And the key personal skills as well that come up. So communication and literacy, personal management, numeracy. Now numeracy, that's an interesting one because as I say, lawyers would say that you don't need to be numerate to be a lawyer. That's why we're a lawyer and not an accountant. But the Law Society do say numeracy is in there. So I think it is absolutely fair to require law students to show that they are numerate to a basic level in there. So as I say, I think tax is a good vehicle for all of these things. So I was reviewing and mapping what we currently offer both at Dundee on our programme level and also in my own modules. So we do have some projects to develop employability through work placements. We're developing a work placement module at the moment that will give credit for either an internship or voluntary work at the Citizens Advice. Also street law can get credit. And we have a mediation project as well. So I'm really interested to hear about the sort of clinical settings for law, because we are developing that at Dundee at the moment. You can also develop employability through standalone modules. And I discussed this in my paper as well. And there is some evidence that that's actually a good thing to do in an undergraduate law programme before they get to the vocational stage, because as we know, they're going for interviews before they get to the vocational stage. Employers are expecting commercial awareness before that stage. So giving them a chance to have kind of experience of these more clinical, vocational, practical skills is really helpful when they're going for interviews and speaking to employers. And then the third way to do it potentially is the subject-specific module. So that's what I looked at here. So as I say, my tax law honours course, are there ways that it could embed these skills more clearly? So at the moment, I'm taking them, I'm giving them the basics of tax, and then the way to kind of enhance and take it to deeper learning is through doing tax planning. So once they've learned the basics of inheritance tax, how do you take it a step further? How do you advise a client on how to mitigate or reduce their burden of tax? They also do a research essay, and the exam is very much problem-based, so they're advising a client. So in some ways it does have some of these skills written in already, as in a lot of law courses do have this problem-based theme. More so we have on the postgraduate diploma, because in that course they're actually interviewing clients or actors, and they're advising, they're writing letters to clients and drafting real legal documents. So we do get them in their exam to actually do HMRC forms as if it was for a real client. So my review and map found that yes, we do some of this already, as you might expect, but I think there's more we can do. I was reading up on this for my report, and what I found quite interesting was it's important that we tell the students, we let the students know that they should be developing a particular skill when they do something. So I'm sure we all give students tasks that we expect, oh, this is going to improve X, their communication or their teamwork or something. But I think just underlining to the student that that is what you are hoping them to get, because then they'll understand. It's talked about kind of speaking the language of employability, as I've got at the bottom of the slide. So if you say to them, right, this is an exercise in your communication with clients, and then when they're asked about that in an interview, it might click, it might jog their memory that, yeah, we've done this. Oh, actually, yeah, we did do an exercise on this. I've done this before. I think that's quite important. So I think just even doing what we do already, but making that even clearer. So filling in the gaps that I've identified, I think we could definitely do more practical exercises in class. I've been thinking about the coursework style, so I'm thinking I might move away from an essay, although my essay this year is on Lorraine Kelly and those cases with the Dundee connection. And moving towards perhaps coming up with a problem and then getting the students to do a memo to the partner which says, right, this is the relevant law, but then here's the letter to the client, and speaking in client-friendly language about tax, which when you think about it is a really quite high-level skill. So you have to understand the tax, the complex legislation, the cases. You have to then distill it, work it out appropriately, the answer, and then distill it down to the student in a way that they can understand it. So I think that's a better way perhaps that I could do the coursework. So I'm going to do all the steps with the QA to move towards that. And the assessment style as well, I think it works quite well at the moment with the problem questions. I think I'm thinking about whether I should include more calculations. There's might be some resistance from the students. I might get my numbers down a little bit to more manageable levels for marking perhaps if I put more numbers in. I think I'd have to be careful if I put more numbers in not to discriminate against any student with dyscalculia or similar issues. So that's one I'm thinking about at the moment. And then the changes that I do implement, so as I say, if I do change the coursework, The next stage of the HEA framework is actually evaluating, well, how has this helped? Has it helped at all? There's discussion in literature about actually it's quite difficult tracking this added value. So it might just be anecdotal that you get from it. But I think we all know when the students are engaged, that can be a bit of a test. Feedback from students, obviously, and seeing if they do feel more prepared for interviews, if you're doing this more practical sorts of exercises with them. So, right, spoiler. So what did the law, better not move on to that one so quickly. So just to wrap up my project there, so I really sort of mapped out how I would try and embed more employability skills into my law course. I did all this over the summer without knowing whether they're going to make tax law mandatory again. It would be from next year. And ultimately they've decided not to. So I think that's a bit of a shame. So they're not making it mandatory. The only thing that they've changed on their whole syllabus, so we've got public law, we've got powers, and then they've added including taxation. And then they've got composition and powers of the local governments, including taxation. So that's all they've done is added a tiny little bit to the private law, public law syllabus. And I think in effect what will happen is I just get reeled into the public law one lecture for one day. Here's your tax stuff, off I go. I think that's the only extra thing that the Law Society is expecting. So I feel a bit annoyed, I suppose. I think obviously it's easy to be precious about your own subject. Of course we should teach tax law. How can you not teach tax? But that's their decision. I think waiting to hear from their reasons. As I say, they only reported last week. It might be the crowded curriculum and so on. I think they've missed a wee trick though. But as I say, they updated this presumably because of the new tax powers that have come in since 2011, and there's a little picture of me in the Scottish Parliament. So what do I think? Do I think we should teach tax to lawyers? Well, yeah, ideally, I'd love that. I'd love it to be compulsory, apart from maybe the marking of even more students. I think it would be helpful for the next stage when you go on to the vocational courses, because I think at the moment you've got to really sort of dump a lot of tax on them when they start the vocational course, and then they're going on and doing it pervasively. I think it'd be good to have a good grounding in the principles and policies of tax before you do that. And the other part of this, of course, is tax-aware lawyers. It's really important that lawyers, of all kinds of lawyers, from conveyancers to even personal injury lawyers, know about tax changes. So I used to do a lot of advice work on trusts for personal injuries and criminal injury compensation. So tax, every lawyer needs to go tax. A surprising number and variety of lawyers need to know something about tax issues. So I think it's really essential that CPD is available to solicitors. Flog it if you can, they need it, it's important to them. Okay, thank you very much.